If you love stories to keep you on edge, ones that make you gasp, think, and crave more, then you are in the right place. Hit that like button. Subscribe and share because some tales are just too good to keep to yourself. Welcome to Corny Tales, where the unexpected is just the beginning.
Liana Monroe opened the limousine door and stepped onto the wet New York sidewalk on a chilly late night. The rain had been falling lightly for hours, and the streets shimmered with the reflections of the city lights, making the entire scene feel as though it were wrapped in a surreal veil. The bright city lights mixed with mysterious shadows, casting long, eerie shapes that danced across the pavement as if trying to keep pace with her. Her heels clicked sharply against the damp ground, the sound a rhythmic punctuation against the otherwise quiet night. She could feel the chill in the air creeping through her coat, yet there was an odd warmth building within her chest. A strange mixture of excitement and dread had taken root there. Each step she took toward the Regency Hotel was one more toward something uncertain, something she didn't fully understand. She was walking into the unknown. With every confident step, Liana's exterior remained poised, calm, even glamorous, an image honed over years of practice. Yet inside her mind was a storm of anxious turmoil. She could barely focus on the cold mist rising around her. All she could hear was the echo of her own racing heartbeat. The faces of her husband, Cameron, and the other man, Dirk, swirled in her thoughts, their voices intertwining in a cacophony of confusion and guilt. Liana paused for a moment at the hotel's entrance, her gaze drifting up toward the building's towering facade. The Regency Hotel had always been a symbol of elegance and refinement in the city, a place where the richest and most influential gathered. It had been Cameron's idea to meet here, of all places, as though their broken marriage could somehow be mended in the midst of such opulence. With a deep breath, she squared her shoulders and pushed the heavy door open, stepping into the warm embrace of the lobby. The contrast was immediate, from the cold, lonely night outside to the refined elegance within. Soft lighting bathed the room in a golden hue, casting gentle shadows against the sleek, modern angles of the design. Everything about the lobby spoke of sophistication, yet there was something oddly oppressive about it, a sense of loneliness that seemed to seep into the very walls. It was a quiet kind of melancholy, as if the building itself had witnessed too many broken dreams. Her eyes quickly scanned the lobby, taking in the fine details, the polished marble floors, the glimmering chandeliers above, the sleek reception desk. The place was beautiful, of course, but it was also unnerving. At the reception desk, a young employee with a bright, polite smile greeted her. But it wasn't the warmth in his expression that caught her attention. It was the strange, distant look in his eyes, as though something was being concealed behind his gaze. She couldn't place it, but there was an undeniable sense of unease in the air. Liana moved closer, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. 1,000 thoughts surged in her mind. She recalled the heated phone call she had received from Cameron just hours earlier, his voice raw with emotion. She had been with Dirk at the time, and the memory of that moment, a mix of desire and shame, haunted her. She had tried to focus on the conversation with her husband, to make sense of the words he had spoken, but all she could think about was the forbidden encounter with Dirk that had taken place only moments before. Cameron had been desperate. He had wanted to talk, to find a way to fix what was broken between them, but Liana wasn't sure if she could fix it anymore. She wasn't sure if she even wanted to. Her heart was torn between the regret she felt over her marriage and the pulsing attraction that she could not ignore. Every minute of that phone call had been a delicate dance of words, lies, half-truths, promises of change. Yet there was something in his voice, something in his plea, that made her hesitate. She had told him she would meet him at the hotel. She had agreed to come, though she wasn't sure what she would find when she arrived. Liana's gaze shifted to the far side of the lobby, where the grand staircase spiraled upward. It looked as if it could lead her anywhere, toward reconciliation with Cameron, or toward the unknown. The heavy feeling of anticipation grew in her chest, like a storm building on the horizon. Her thoughts were interrupted when a movement caught her eye. She turned just in time to see the silhouette of a doorman bowing respectfully, his tall, lean figure framed by the light pouring through the large glass doors. He was a man of few words, but his presence was enough to send a shiver down Liana's spine. His gaze was steady and polite, his expression gentle as he held out a gleaming silver hat toward her. She hadn't noticed him earlier, but now it seemed as though he had been waiting for her. He smiled, his eyes warm but distant. Without a word, he opened the heavy doors and motioned for her to follow. The cool evening air rushed in, mixing with the warmth of the lobby. Liana stepped forward, the sound of her heels against the stone floor now mingling with the soft echo of the doors closing behind her. The doorman led her down a hallway lined with soft, glowing sconces. The atmosphere here was even more intimate, even more private. She felt like a guest in a world that wasn't her own, a world that seemed to belong to someone else entirely, but she couldn't escape the feeling that she was being watched, that every step she took was being observed by invisible eyes. Following closely behind, a young bellhop wheeled a luggage cart with measured, deliberate steps. He didn't speak, his eyes fixed ahead as though the task at hand was the only thing that mattered. Yet, Liana couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to him than met the eye. His movements seemed rehearsed, as if he had walked this path countless times before, each step ingrained in him like a memory he could. Liana's mind wandered again. She thought of the events that had led her here. Her marriage with Cameron, which had been filled with moments of joy and love, but had ultimately been consumed by distance and betrayal. The phone call had been the final straw, the moment when the truth of their situation could no longer be ignored. But even as she walked toward this meeting with Cameron, she couldn't escape the shadow of Dirk, the man who had stirred something deep within her on a business trip to Chicago. That night with Dirk had been a turning point. The forbidden nature of their encounter, the way he had looked at her, had ignited a fire she hadn't realized existed. It was a temptation that she hadn't been able to resist, a temptation that had lingered in the back of her mind ever since. And yet, now, standing in the grand lobby of the Regency Hotel, she wasn't sure where she stood with either man. The bellhop led her past rows of plush leather sofas and neatly arranged chairs and tables. The hotel seemed to stretch on forever, its luxurious design creating an air of distance, of exclusivity. But no matter how many steps she took, Liana still saw no sign of Cameron. The waiting began to weigh on her, heavy as a leaden cloud in her chest. Each passing moment felt like a ticking clock, marking the time until something would finally happen. Whether it was a reunion or an unraveling, she couldn't help but glance at the sparkling hotel doors again, hoping for a sign, any sign. Perhaps Cameron would walk through them at any moment, his familiar features appearing like a beacon in the midst of the haze that had overtaken her life. She longed for his presence, for some assurance that they could find their way back. But as the minutes stretched on, she found herself thinking of Dirk again. The way he had kissed her, the way he had touched her, had ignited something in her that Cameron had not been able to in a long time. She had told herself that it was just a moment, a lapse in judgment, but now, standing in this opulent hotel, she wasn't sure what was real anymore. The minutes passed, and still no sign of Cameron. Liana's heart pounded in her chest. Was this what she had come for, to find him? Or was she seeking something else entirely? Her eyes flickered toward the door again, waiting for an answer, but the silence stretched on. Liana Monroe told herself that tonight everything had to change. Tonight, all of the unanswered questions in her heart, questions that had been festering for far too long, would finally be answered. She clung to the hope that with just a small sign, a glimmer of something beyond the fog of confusion, Cameron would appear. She needed to see him, to feel his presence, to know where they stood, if there was any hope of repair or if their once beautiful love had been irrevocably broken. She could feel her pulse quicken as she stood alone in the vast hotel lobby, each breath shallow, each second stretching out like an eternity. The cold marble floors beneath her feet felt slick, as if the weight of her past, full of regrets and unspoken words, was pressing down on her. Liana's gaze darted around the room, yet nothing familiar anchored her. The soft glow of the chandeliers above bathed the space in a luxurious light, but in her chest, there was nothing but a gnawing emptiness. The world around her felt at once elegant and painfully cold, the polished surfaces and sparkling surfaces betraying an unseen desolation. Liana had made the decision to come to the Regency Hotel in hopes of seeing Cameron, hoping to clear the air between them. It had been too long since they'd truly been together, too long since they had talked, really talked, without accusations and tension suffocating the space between them. After the heated phone call, after the fights, after everything, Liana had to find the answers, the ones that had eluded her for months. Could she salvage what remained? Could they return to the love they had once shared? Her thoughts were abruptly interrupted when she felt an unsettling gaze fixed on her. She turned her head quickly, only to lock eyes with a stranger, his face obscured by shadows, his gaze unnervingly cold and appraising. There was something in the way he looked at her, something she couldn't decipher. It was as if he were judging her every move, dissecting her every breath. She shuddered, despite herself. It was not the type of attention she was accustomed to, at least not the kind she could easily ignore. The feeling of unease tightened its grip around her heart, and as Liana made her way deeper into the lobby, it seemed the shadows in the corners grew darker, as though they were somehow closing in on her. She had hoped that arriving here would somehow offer clarity, but now, surrounded by strangers, she only felt more lost. Her mind began to swirl with images. Pictures of Cameron's face twisted in anger, his voice accusing her over the phone. "I know what you've done, Liana. I know everything." The words rang in her head like a church bell, each toll louder and sharper than the last. She had betrayed him. She knew it. The guilt that had been simmering in her chest ever since that night with Derek in Chicago had only grown. The memories were a muddled mess of temptation, desire, and regret. Derek had been the man she never should have let into her life, the man who had swept her off her feet in ways that left her both intoxicated and ashamed. His cold, calculating eyes still lingered in her memory, and her body involuntarily stiffened at the thought of him. But as she tried to focus on the present, she couldn't help but wonder, was Cameron here? Was he in the maze of the hotel's lavish hallways, waiting for her with the answers she needed? Or was there something else waiting for her? Something darker, more insidious. As her thoughts spiraled further, Liana found herself sinking into the plush seating area of the lobby. She needed a moment to breathe, to collect herself. She tried to steady her racing pulse as she looked around, attempting to ground herself in the reality around her. It was in that moment of stillness that her mind began to drift to the phone call with Cameron. His words echoed in her head, the anger in his voice mixed with the unmistakable heartbreak. "Liana, why did you do this?" Cameron's voice had been raw, the hurt evident in every syllable. "How could you betray me like this?" The memory of his words hit her like a fist to the chest. She had tried to explain, to offer some form of justification for her actions, but it felt impossible. Every time she opened her mouth, the truth seemed to slip through her fingers like sand. She couldn't explain how she'd been seduced by Derek's presence, how she had allowed herself to be lost in a moment of weakness. Cameron's voice had boomed through the phone, every word cutting through the air like a blade. "Don't lie to me, Liana. I know everything." Her heart had plummeted to the floor when he said that. It was as if the very foundation of everything she had believed in was crumbling beneath her. And, as the guilt and shame settled over her, she remembered the phone call from that night. The steely gaze of Derek, his voice a soft whisper that promised everything and nothing all at once. She had told herself it was just a fleeting moment, that it was nothing serious. But now, she couldn't escape the truth. She had made choices that would haunt her forever. Liana snapped out of her thoughts as she overheard a nearby conversation between two strangers. A woman, speaking softly, said, "Can you see? Maribel always has a way of making everyone forget their troubles." The man beside her responded, his voice tinged with skepticism. Maribel truly possesses a unique charm. But do you believe that sometimes such a lure is merely a trick of the light? Maribel. Liana's heart skipped a beat at the name. Maribel was Cameron's neighbor in their apartment complex, and Liana had always been uneasy around her. The woman was flawless in every way. Too perfect, almost. Her polished beauty, her effortless grace, everything about her seemed designed to distract. And as much as Liana tried to ignore it, there had always been something about Maribel that made her feel like she was in the shadows of someone else's story. Liana had never understood it, why Cameron seemed so distant at times, why he was always looking over his shoulder, as if searching for something just out of reach. It wasn't just that he was distant in their relationship, it was the way he seemed to slip away from her, disappearing into the world outside their shared space. She had wondered more than once if Maribel was the reason for this, the reason for Cameron's coldness, the reason for the silence that had become so deafening between them. With the thought of Maribel came the realization that she was not entirely innocent in the unraveling of her marriage. But was Cameron any different? Had he been faithful in every way? And even if he had been, did he still love her, or had her own actions already doomed them both? The lobby seemed to close in around her as her thoughts spiraled, leaving her feeling more and more alone. Was she to blame for everything? Was her love for Cameron even real anymore, or had it been clouded by the shadow of someone else's presence? Her heart lurched as the reception desk clerk, Donovan, interrupted her reverie. "Good evening, ma'am. May I have your reservation name, please?" Liana took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "Liana Monroe. I have a reservation for one night." Donovan's eyes flickered briefly, his polite smile betraying a hint of curiosity. His fingers clicked on the keyboard, and then he paused, his expression shifting slightly. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we are having a little problem with the payment method. Your Visa card has been declined." Her heart skipped a beat. "What?" she asked, her voice trembling. "So, can I use my MasterCard?" Donovan hesitated for a moment, his fingers tapping nervously on the keyboard. Then his frown deepened. "I'm afraid your MasterCard is also not accepted. Do you have any other form of payment?" A cold sweat began to bead on Liana's brow. She had enough to cover the cost of one night. Why were her cards being declined? This wasn't just an inconvenience. It felt like a sign, like everything was going wrong all at once. Behind the desk, she noticed a young couple, Simone and Carlyle, standing, their faces tense and full of sorrow. The woman, Simone, was holding a thick envelope with divorce papers, her face a mixture of resignation and pain. Liana couldn't help but feel the weight of their situation, the parallels to her own life too close for comfort. Her fingers clenched at her sides as she felt the burn of humiliation rising in her chest. "Maybe I'll just call Cameron to clarify this," she murmured to herself. Her fingers shook as she retrieved her cell phone from her purse, dialing his number without thinking. But when the call went through, she was greeted by an ominous message. "This number is no longer in service." Her breath caught in her throat. What was happening? Why couldn't she reach him? Was this a sign that everything was falling apart? Donovan, noticing her distress, tried to reassure her. "Please, hold on a moment, ma'am. I will contact the payment department." Liana stood frozen in the Regency Hotel lobby, her fingers trembling as she clutched the envelope that had changed everything. The words from Cameron's letter echoed in her mind, haunting her with every passing second. His betrayal was sharp, cruel, and final. The tone of his message, his cold detachment, was like an unspoken accusation, a silent verdict on everything they had shared. But there was something else buried within those words that made Liana's heart ache. Despite the finality in his words, there was an underlying feeling of emptiness. Cameron had offered no hope, no room for resolution. He had written her off completely, and in doing so he had robbed her of the only thing she had left, the possibility of reconciliation. Liana stood motionless, watching the hustle and bustle of the lobby. The lights around her seemed to flicker with an almost cruel irony, as if they were reminding her that life was moving forward, whether she was ready for it or not. The city outside, teeming with life, seemed to mock her isolation. I can't stay here, she thought. This place, these memories, they're all too much. Her thoughts began to scatter, chaotic and unanchored, like the last pieces of a broken puzzle she could never complete. As much as she tried to tell herself she was done with Cameron, with Derek, and with the endless turmoil of her past, the pain of their betrayals seemed to have roots deeper than she could ever grasp. She needed to escape. She needed a moment of clarity. Something beyond the walls of this hotel. Liana's hand slipped into her pocket, her fingers brushing against her phone. She had almost forgotten about it, but as she checked the screen, her heart skipped a beat. An unknown number blinked back at her. A sense of foreboding washed over her as she hesitated. The last thing she needed right now was another reminder of her fractured life. But with a deep breath, she answered. "Liana, this is Quentin," came the calm voice on the other end. "I know this is hard to hear, but there's something you need to know." Quentin, Cameron's old friend. Her stomach twisted. What could he possibly want? "Cameron's decided to go far away," Quentin continued, his voice gentle yet serious. "He's beginning a new journey, an independent life he's always longed for. He won't be coming back." Liana's mind raced. Her heart hammered in her chest. Could it be true? Could Cameron really have just walked away as if their love had meant nothing? "But," Quentin added, his tone softening slightly, "he also hopes that you'll find your own path. You deserve a future beyond this. A future beyond this." For a moment, Liana's breath caught. The weight of Quentin's words felt like an unexpected gift. She had spent so much time agonizing over her past, over the broken pieces of her relationship with Cameron, that she hadn't stopped to consider the possibility that there might be something better waiting for her. Something her own two hands could build. "Take care of yourself, Liana," Quentin said softly before hanging up. "Sometimes loss is life's way of teaching us to cherish what we can build from the fragments." Her vision blurred with unshed tears, but for the first time in a long while, they weren't tears of defeat. They were tears of realization. Cameron had taken away so much from her, but he hadn't taken away her future. Not yet. Not unless she let him. Liana stepped out of the hotel and into the cold New York night. The air was sharp, and the wind seemed to cut right through her as she walked along the sidewalk. She paused for a moment, feeling the chill of the city wrapping itself around her like an uninvited guest. The world was still moving, still turning, the flashing neon signs in the distance, the hum of the late-night traffic, the sounds of laughter and conversations from distant bars. They were all signs of life that Liana had been too numb to notice for far too long. She was alive, and for the first time in ages, she realized how much she had taken that for granted. As her feet carried her down the busy streets, her mind raced. Quentin's words had struck a chord within her, but there was still something she needed to understand, something about herself. She needed to piece together the fragments of her identity, the pieces that had scattered in the wake of her tumultuous relationship with Cameron. It wasn't just about finding herself again. It was about rebuilding who she was. She wasn't the person she had been when she first met Cameron. She wasn't the naive woman who had believed in the fairy tale. The betrayal, the heartbreak, had changed her in ways she couldn't fully understand yet, but it had made her stronger. She had faced her darkest fears and come out the other side. "I will not be defined by this," she thought fiercely. It wasn't until Liana reached the edge of Central Park that the tears came again. This time not from sorrow, but from relief. She had no idea where she was going or what tomorrow might bring, but for the first time in a long while, she felt the spark of something more powerful than regret. She was standing at a crossroads, staring at a path she couldn't see yet, but what she did see was the city unfolding before her, alive with possibilities. She wasn't done yet. She dug into her pocket and pulled out the $500 gift card. The cold plastic seemed to mock her, but then she turned it over in her fingers. It was nothing more than a symbol of something she had lost. It wasn't just a gift card. It was a farewell, an ending to the life she had once known. With a small, sad smile, she dropped the card into the nearest trash bin. I'm done, she whispered to herself. I'm done looking back. Leanna's steps were firm now, purposeful as she walked further into the heart of the city. She had no destination in mind, but that didn't matter. The world was wide, and she was free to choose her path. A few blocks away, a small cafe beckoned her. Its warm light spilled onto the street, and for the first time, Leanna felt an unshakable urge to go inside. She hadn't been able to step foot in a cafe in months, not without being reminded of Derek's smile, of late-night rendezvous and the weight of secrets that hung in the air like a dark cloud. But now, it seemed different. It seemed like the right moment to begin again, to drink a cup of coffee and let the world fall back into place, piece by piece. The moment she stepped inside, she felt the comforting warmth of the space wrap around her. The soft murmur of conversations, the clink of spoons against porcelain mugs, and the scent of fresh pastries, all combined to create an atmosphere that felt like a new beginning, one that she was ready for. She sat at the counter ordering a cappuccino, and as the barista set the cup in front of her, she felt something shift within her. This was it, the beginning of something new. She had no idea what the future held, but it was hers to create. Cameron had given her the space to heal, not through his absence, but by making her realize that she had the power to move forward. And as the night stretched on, Leanna smiled for the first time in what felt like forever, knowing that she was walking toward a future she could own. As she sipped her drink, Leanna couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for the pain. It had shattered her, yes, but it had also taught her the most valuable lesson of all, that true strength came from within. She no longer needed the validation of a man who had broken her. She only needed herself. And as she looked around the cafe, her eyes catching the faces of strangers, Leanna felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for so long. She had survived the storm. She had emerged stronger than she had ever been before. And now, it was her turn to thrive.
Don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and turn on notification for more stories. Thanks for watching.